That was a short section of a classic melody known as The Cold Winter, from an unknown composer, as arranged and orchestrated by this episode's guest, Amber Lipman. Welcome to the Greenwood. I'm your host, Thaddeus Papke, and this is the podcast where we peek under the hood of the most famous outlaw who may have never been. From archers to archaeologists, we interview subject matter experts to learn why the figure of Robin Hood continues to endure and consider what we can learn by examining what is known as the matter of the Greenwood. There is no definitive literary origin for Robin Hood. We can't point to a single book or author from which the oldest versions of the tales originate. And the reason we can't do that is because, as far as we can surmise, Robin Hood tales became popular through performance. They were told as rhymes, presented as songs, and often performed as short and likely rowdy plays at local festivals. I discuss the early play game tradition with Robin Hood scholar Will Hoff on episode 45 of the podcast. Since Robin Hood tales originated from forms of live performance, I always get a little bit of extra joy from getting to interview storytellers, actors, and playwrights, as they are continuing in a tradition that began roughly 700 years ago. And as is the case with all the best traditions, they're adding something of themselves and finding relevance for our modern lives. The play Nottingham the Musical especially brings the medieval Robin Hood performances to mind, as it will incorporate medieval English folk music and an element of physical action and fighting that helped popularize the play games, while still presenting a message that hopefully will resonate with modern audiences. The Edinbards, who will be putting on the play, got in touch over Instagram and connected me with Amber Lipman, the play's writer and composer. So, string your bow, book your theater tickets, and perhaps prepare to sing along as we enter the Greenwood with playwright, composer, and musician Amber Lipman. Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really exciting.
Yeah, it's a lovely looking room that you're in there.
Thank you. Yes, nice big Victorian building here,
Yeah.
but filled with many Robin Hood paraphernalia.
Oh, excellent. Yes.
Everywhere.
Yeah, I feel almost a little bit bad that my current recording setup doesn't have my Robin Hood shelf behind me, because that would be very appropriate.
Middle Earth is just as good.
Yeah, that's good too.
This is a fantastic podcast, though. I've listened to a few episodes of it now, so it's very, very exciting to be part of that.
Oh, superb. Yeah, I mean, like I said in our communications, I'm always looking to discuss new ways in which the stories and characters are being adapted, looking for ways to support people who are doing adaptations, putting their own spin on it, putting some work out there, finding a way to help others find it, help increase awareness, and just discussing what is inspiring you to want to talk about Robin Hood. Why in this time is Robin Hood still relevant?
Yeah, it is. It truly is a timeless story. I know people kind of say that all the time, but ultimately we don't choose the world that we're born into. And for hundreds of years, and now in particular, we are born into a world that is full of corruption and greed, and we don't get to make our own rules. And the people who make the rules that we have to live by aren't always the people that should be making those rules. So what Robin Hood and the Merry Men do is, they go off into the woods and they decide, this is our law, these are the rules we're going to live by. And it makes sense, and it's a lot more balanced. And they thrive, or the way that they survive is by taking from the people who are hoarding that wealth and that greed. And that truly is a timeless desire and a timeless need. And I hear that from people around here all the time, saying that they want to run off into the woods with their friends and just live by
Yeah.
their own laws. And it truly is
Let's go start a
timeless.
commune. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah,
such a
and I
timeless
think that's
thing.
the other part of it too, is that building of community, that desire
Mhm.
to build a supportive community.
Yeah, it's truly at the core of all of the ballads. And part of the reason I wanted to do an adaptation is I feel like part of that has been lost in some more modern adaptations, from the desire to make Robin Hood this very heroic figure, this very like a social justice warrior, which is very cool and in some ways does really connect to the original ballads. But I feel like that theme of fellowship in particular does sometimes get a bit lost, but it's so crucial to those
Yeah.
themes.
Yeah, I would agree very strongly. Before we get more into that and how you plan on bringing out those themes into your work, let's introduce you to the audience.
Yeah, of course.
What's your name and what is your play?
My name is Amber. I've written a show called Nottingham the Musical, being produced by a group that I've started called the Edinbards here in Edinburgh. So we've been working, well, I personally have been working on the show for about 10 years now. It's been a decade since I first started writing this. It's been kind of on and off over the past decades as I've been busy with other things. We started the Edinbards, our company, about 3 years ago, but it was with the purpose of staging Nottingham. So we started with a couple of scratch nights. We did one in 2023. We did one a bit more recently last summer, but we've taken the show other places as well. We went to Jaipur Medieval Fair last summer, which was very fun. We took like bits and pieces of the show, but we're now working to put on the entire full production, start to finish, for the first time. And that's going to be happening next month, because today's the 1st of April, isn't it? So next month, May, will be the show's proper first full introduction to the world, which is very, very exciting after 10 years of working on this.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it's really coming together. It's a good team that we have here. Edinburgh is just the perfect place for staging a show like this. So yeah, very, very grateful.
So let's start at the beginning then, 10 years ago or more, what was the initial point of inspiration to write this play? And along with the added question of why a musical?
Well, it started as a creative outlet. I was working on my master's degree at the time. My background's in archaeology, so I was kind of digging away in the dirt and working on my dissertation. But all of my theatre friends had gone home for the summer. There wasn't really a lot of theatre to do, so I was just desperately craving that creative outlet. So I was like, I'm going to write a musical for my friends and I to put on when they come back. 10 years later, with a completely different set of friends, that's finally happening. So, it takes a lot longer than you'd expect. But coming from a background of both archaeology and theatre, I felt like Robin Hood was kind of the perfect topic for that. And the second I decided I want to write a musical, the decision for it to be Robin Hood came almost at exactly the same point. So it's just a perfect culmination of all of my interests in the medieval period in particular, in archaeology and theatre, and in folk music. And it just perfectly really brings it all together. But part of the other reason I wanted to do it is because you don't see a lot of action adventure in musical theatre. I love musicals, I love action adventure, but you don't see them come together really a lot. Again, Robin Hood is the perfect topic to make that happen. There is almost as much sword fighting as there is music in this particular show, which is rare and it's unique. And the fact that I can bring that all with a folk medieval sound into the music is also quite unique in terms of musical theatre. So yeah, it's just more of what I wanted to see in the world, and Robin Hood was just the perfect topic to make that happen.
Oh, fantastic. And let's get a little bit into that folk music element in a moment. But first, what's your kind of Robin Hood origin story? You showed me when we first came on camera a little pop funko of the Disney Fox Robin Hood. So might want to assume that was an influential version of Robin Hood for you growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I was certainly familiar with the Disney version. I think it's probably the only version that I really grew up with. It's only as I've started researching for the show that I've started obsessively devouring all the stories and all the film adaptations out there. So yeah, I absolutely grew up with the Disney version. But I don't think, well, I might have come across a couple of the stories along the way, just traveling through bookshops and such. But I didn't really start researching the topic in detail until I decided that I wanted to write this musical. So it came more from a perspective of loving everything to do with the medieval vibes. So it wasn't just Robin Hood, it was also King Arthur, and pretty much any famous tale that was set within that world, within that time period, was something of interest. So Robin Hood specifically, I think I loved that vibe and the aesthetic and the themes around that. But I didn't realize where that connection was really coming from until I made the decision to write about it and start researching that. So I didn't necessarily grow up with this real obsession towards Robin Hood specifically. It was more around the general historical fiction context, I suppose, for Robin Hood. And then the actual Robin Hood obsession picked up as soon as I started researching it and diving in a bit further.
And the interest in music and how you're bringing that in, and I'm assuming you're doing a bit of a focus on English folk music to lend some authenticity. How did that get paired in, and where did that interest come from?
Yeah, I've always been a musician. I play the flute, but I was lucky to grow up in a household of musicians. My mum's a pianist as well, and she also loves folk music, so it was something that I grew up listening to. And once I started playing the flute, it was something I've been playing a lot of as well. But part of the tricky thing with incorporating that into the sound of the show is when people think folk music, they think particularly Irish or Scottish folk music. And so when you see that incorporated into Robin Hood adaptations, it sounds more Irish than it does English. So part of the challenge has been pulling in the folk side and the medieval side without straying too far from the actual historical origin of Robin Hood. So yeah, there's certainly English elements. Some of them are actual medieval songs. So I use tunes like Summers Are Coming In, which we've heard in Robin Hood adaptations before. There's a gorgeous tune called Drive the Cold Winter Away. It's like a medieval Christmas carol that I incorporate as well. There's a medieval tune called Parson's Farewell. So I'm taking bits and pieces of these actual medieval tunes and incorporating them into the score, in addition to writing my own music that's inspired by these sounds. But yeah, part of that challenge is keeping it very focused on the time period and the place that Robin Hood is meant to be set, and not being too tempted to stray too far into other realms. So as much as Irish and Scottish folk music is a kind of sound that I grew up with, so it is very tempting to stray into those, and I see why lots of other people do it. But yes, the focus is very much on medieval English folk sound for this particular show.
That sounds amazing. The only other staged musical version of Robin Hood I've seen has been in the form of Christmas pantomime that was just using like modern pop music, having like Rockin' Robin and things like that, which is very fun. But actually having a play that is leaning into medieval traditions and medieval songs, and you mentioned songs like Summers Are Coming In, that is a song that we know dates back to at least 12th or 13th century.
Yeah.
So it is very much an appropriate song for that time period. And can be hard to find that kind of music, that sort of authenticity. Not a lot was really recorded and written down for us. So being able to pull on whatever traditions you can there and really incorporating it sounds amazing.
And it's exactly why I wanted to do it, is because I felt like there wasn't really enough of it, particularly for Robin Hood. I felt like that was really a deep well to be discovered. And there have been other musical adaptations. There's one in particular that I'm kind of focused on at the moment that's it's actually in Germany, so it's entirely in German, so I don't understand everything that they're saying. But it's a very fun adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, there have been operas and things going back for hundreds of years. Tying Robin Hood to musical performance goes a long way, but it still can be hard to find something that has a feeling of authenticity to it. We mentioned the Disney animated one. That one's got songs. They're written by an American country singer.
Yeah.
So great
and most
songs,
of them have
but
American accents, which is very fun. And then, of course, you get the one scene in Shrek where Robin Hood is French. And yeah, very fun moments like that. But yeah, authenticity is really the goal of this. And it's not even just in the music. It is in the actual plot and in the characters themselves, moments from the ballads, pulling things in from the Jest of Robin Hood, from Robin Hood and the Monk, Robin Hood and the Potter. Like, all of these moments do appear in the show. But we try to make that a kind of authentic, cohesive plot line from start to finish. It's just moments that make it feel authentic.
Yeah, that was my next kind of question I was going to lead into, was what sort of other ways are you intending to make, pull on that idea of authenticity? And also, like, when is it set time period wise? Because, of course, most modern adaptations have it set in the late 12th century, around the time of the Third Crusade and the reign of King Richard I. But the actual ballad tradition from the Middle Ages comes from a later time period and mentions Edward as the king. We don't know which Edward, but a Edward. And we just know that sometime in the 14th century, so quite a deal later, is when people were initially singing and possibly writing down some of these stories. So
Yeah.
when is your story set, and what other elements are you drawing from besides the music and the elements from the ballads to help with the authenticity?
Well, Nottingham in this case is set very specifically in the 12th century, and there's a reason for that I'll circle back to. But I think part of what makes it harder and easier at the same time is the fact that Robin Hood has spanned for so many centuries. So when I'm saying that I want to keep it authentic, that's across so many centuries of potential authenticity. So I kind of draw on pretty much anything up to the Victorian era. I tend not to draw too much from the Victorian side of things. But if it's pre-Victorian era, I'll kind of consider that as something that I feel like I can use and still make it feel kind of authentic. But the reason I've set it specifically in the 1100s is because I've done something a tad unusual that has not been done in Robin Hood adaptations before. And I've brought Prince John's brother, Prince Geoffrey, back from the grave. As a character that features in the show. And
that
the reason
different.
Very different. And the reason I set it in that specific year is because historically that's when Prince Geoffrey actually died. But we are using his death as a particular plot point within the show, which is kind of a spoiler alert. Part of the reason I wanted to set it then is so that I could justify having that character as part of it. But
so
also
set during the reign of King Henry II, then. The father of Richard and John and Geoffrey.
Yeah, so King Richard, Richard is still kind of the kind of key figure as part of that. And that's the other thing that makes it tricky in terms of writing it for a modern audience is keeping things historically authentic, but still recognizably Robin Hood to a modern audience. Because we feel that we have to have King Richard as the reigning monarch to make it Robin Hood nowadays. So it's balancing the authenticity with what we expect to be Robin Hood in the modern audience. Yeah, trickier part of that, but yeah, Prince Geoffrey is a bit of a curveball for this particular one. I've set it there, and I've kind of stretched and pulled. I've taken some creative liberties to make that happen. So there's reasons that we've included him. The main one being to give Prince John a bit more of an edge, so he's still this very silly, childish figure that you expect kind of from the Disney version. But I wanted to emphasize the fact that he's not just silly and childish; he's also dangerous and bloodthirsty. And by bringing Prince Geoffrey back and having a bit of a rivalry between them, we see some of that come into play and we start to fear him a little bit more. So I've taken some creative liberties to make that happen. But ultimately, it is a kind of the core themes and the core characters that are drawing the authenticity into the show.
So besides some of our nobles there, perhaps functioning as foils for the outlaw Robin, what other characters are you drawing in, whether from the ballads or other Robin Hood adaptations? Who should people expect to see?
Most of the core merry men. I've had to cut a couple along the way. The script has gone through so many different variants. And the reason for that is just a large cast show is quite difficult to kind of put on the stage. And what the big piece of advice that has been consistently given to me over the years is to make the cast smaller, which is a tricky thing to do with Robin Hood. It's such an inherently large cast topic. You can't do it as a smaller cast. So I have trimmed it back a little bit through the years. I've cut a couple merry men. Much the Miller's Son used to feature as a character, unfortunately, is no longer. You have the core three, of course. You have Robin Hood, Little John, Friar Tuck. We do, of course, have our Maid Marian, which again becomes tricky in terms of authenticity because Maid Marian is a bit more recent in terms of the ballads themselves. You have Will Scathlock. I've kept the name Scathlock. I know he kind of features under different names throughout the years. Those are really the core ones. Alan Adale, of course, does feature as our minstrel.
It seemed like a shoe-in when you're going to do a musical version to include Alan Adale.
Yeah, you have to. Alan Adale does open the show and does feature quite prominently throughout. So those are the core groups of merry men. So in the interest of keeping it authentic, all the characters that appear have appeared in the ballads as well. I've not added any particular characters. The closest I've come to that is the sheriff's wife, who has been mentioned in a couple of ballads and stories before. But in this version, I've kind of made her more of her own character in the interest of having other female characters around. So she has much more to do, and she kind of bolsters the sheriff's character a bit more as an extra dimension to him. But otherwise, all the characters mentioned do come straight from the ballads. I've not added anything additional.
The sheriff's wife is kind of one of my favorite under-the-radar Robin Hood characters. When I was directing a Robin Hood show for a Renaissance festival many, many years ago, I made sure that she was one of the characters that got included. And there's been a few writers every now and then that will use her in fun and creative ways. And that's always nice to see when she pops up. Because as you say, she does actually appear in the medieval sources. She's a prominent figure in Robin Hood and the Potter.
Mm-hmm. Robin Hood and the Potter is probably my favorite one, and she's probably my favorite aspect of that. So she features slightly differently in this version. The plot of Nottingham involves Friar Tuck being arrested and kind of taking off to Nottingham, and the merry men have to come and try and get him back. So the sheriff's wife, who I've named Isabella in this particular version, lives within the castle, and she forms a relationship with Friar Tuck and a kind of friendly dynamic with him, and is ultimately instrumental in his release and reunion with the merry men. So she's a slightly different character than what we see in Robin Hood and the Potter and within other stories. But in the interest of creating another female character within it, because traditionally there aren't really a lot of female characters significantly appearing within the Robin Hood ballads, and of course being a female writer, I wanted to incorporate that as much as I can. So Maid Marian will be the obvious one. Isabella, the sheriff's wife, is a character that I've created more of. Didn't invent her, of course. I've just given her more to do.
Oh yeah, and I mean she's a pretty blank slate that you get to work from there.
Yeah,
which is part of what makes her fun to work with in adaptations that include her.
Yeah, and is as you say, very much a kind of blank canvas. So you can't stray too far from the original when there's not much that the original provides. But yeah, in the interest of adding other female characters, another kind of unusual detail I've done is I've gender bent the role of Guy of Gisborne. So instead of referring to him as Guy of Gisborne, I refer to her simply as Gisborne. And I felt like there was something about that just gave her a bit more of an edge. It's already quite a scary character, this kind of violent, bloodthirsty assassin figure. But yeah, there's something about her being female that I felt lent a bit more into that and actually made her even scarier. There's another level to that. The weird detail as well in the ballads that Guy of Gisborne dresses as a horse.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of leather horse vibe. And there's that stereotypical like crazy horse girl, if you're familiar with that. Having been a crazy horse girl myself.
Yes.
I just felt like there was something to kind of play with there. And we don't really lean into that at all, really. It's not even really a reference. But there was something about the character that I felt was a bit scarier, leaning into it as a female character. So that's one of the more unusual choices that we've made with this particular version.
Aside from the historical figures like King Richard and Prince John, I think that Guy of Gisborne might be the only one who I have not previously seen a gender bent version of. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah, it's not something that's really acknowledged necessarily. We've done some kind of gender blind casting too. So ultimately it's not like Gisborne's not about being a woman. Like that's not the point of her character necessarily. She just happens to be played by a woman in this particular version. That's a role that's been specifically gender bent, but there are other roles, including Alan Adale, that have been cast gender blind. So it's a woman playing Alan Adale, but that doesn't necessarily change the character or the story in any way. It's just gender blind casting. But yeah, Gisborne's done a bit of we've done something a tad unusual with that. But yeah, those are the three kind of main female characters in this. You have your Maid Marian, Isabella the sheriff's wife, and then in this case, Gisborne.
Excellent. And your Marian in this adaptation, how does she fit into the story? Kind of what's the thrust of her character and her role?
Yeah, Marian is probably one of, if not the most challenging character to write, again, because she does tend to fall more towards the modern end of Robin Hood adaptations. So with the goal of sticking to the early ballads, it's not actually that authentic to include Maid Marian. But as
you don't get real versions of Marian and Marian appearing in ballads and plays and stories until, the modern period, until post-Renaissance. In the 1700s, 1800s is when there's Marian sources to even pull from.
Yeah, she doesn't.
Yeah, I guess the Tudor stuff with the Anthony Munday plays, but not much beyond that.
Yeah, precisely. And they're good fun, but yeah, it seems like she doesn't become that popular until Victorian era, until that kind of later area. So yeah, in terms of keeping it authentic, it is quite tricky. But as with Prince John and King Richard, in order to make it a recognizably Robin Hood adaptation, Maid Marian has to be there. You have to have Robin Hood as Maid Marian. So what I've done is I was really drawn particularly to that story where Marion disguises herself as a man and runs off into the woods, and she and Robin fight. And it's such a fantastic moment, and I really love that story. So I have kept that moment, and I've experimented with it over the years. So originally I kept it exactly as it was in the story, where this was a point of Robin and Marion reuniting. They already knew each other, and they're reuniting in this moment. But what I've done is I've changed that a little bit, and instead of them reuniting, it's them meeting for the first time. This is their meet cute within the story. So that's their first appearance, is them fighting, and then they reveal themselves and they have that introduction. But from there, I've kind of tried to lean into the fact that she is a bit of a dark horse and that she's not terribly authentic. And I think when I'm watching more recent Robin Hood adaptations in films, we do tend towards this trend of making her this very strong, female warrior, which is fantastic and is fun, and I love watching that. But there's something that always feels a bit off, because what the film adaptations are doing is they're taking this mysterious character and really trying to make it their own, which again is fantastic. Of course, that is what you would do. But I think the challenge of that is making that your own character, but still making it feel authentic to the ballads, because she's not actually authentic. So it's towing that line and finding that balance that has been really quite tricky. So I've kept that moment from one of the earlier stories of her and Robin fighting in the woods. But from there, I've tried to lean into the fact that she is a bit of a dark horse and we don't know that much about her. And I've given her some parallels with Robin as well to kind of it makes that connection make sense. It makes her cohesion into the Merry Men make a bit more sense. So she also comes from that background of thieving from the city of Nottingham. You have Robin coming from thieving from Sherwood Forest, and then the two kind of come together. And I've used a moment from Robin Hood and the Monk, where Robin is recognized by someone that he has robbed from in the woods previously. And I've taken that character and made him a recurring character. But in this case, that character is more not Robin, sorry. That's going to be Marion's rival. So Robin has a sheriff, that's their traditional rivalry. And in this case, the monk figure becomes Marion's rival and becomes a more recurring character throughout. So again, trying to pull those actual moments from the ballads to make that authentic sense. But yes, Marion is absolutely one of the more challenging characters to get right, it feels. So she does have quite a lot of stage combat. We have an absolutely fantastic fight director who has made that fight look amazing with her and Robin in the woods. It's looking really, really good. But yeah, really leaning into the fact that she is a bit of a dark horse, but still comes from a similar thieving history that you'd expect from the Merry Men.
Yeah, so I've got a few more questions about like the ballads and that you chose to pull from there and what you were most excited about and what you found challenging. But since you just brought up the stage combat with Marion, let's talk just a little bit about what that process was like, because I know it can be a real challenge to do good looking but also safe combat in a stage environment. You mentioned that you were working with a choreographer. Are you using steel blades? Are you pulling in elements of archery into the show as well?
Yes. So just to make that even trickier for our case, we are doing the show in the round. So it not only has to look good, it has to look good from every possible angle as you're watching the show. So we do have, again, an incredible fight director who I've met doing other shows here in Edinburgh. Very grateful that she's come on board to do this. So yes, we are hoping to use steel swords. At the moment, we have a variety of swords that we're using for practice, so we're going to source a few more steel swords. But she really, really knows what she's doing. So again, coming from in the round, you do have to test it from every angle, make it look believable. So a lot of people getting punched in the face as well, but you have to make that look believable. And again, there's almost as much sword fighting as there is music in the show, being an action-adventure musical. So a lot of time with our fight choreographer. But we are, of course, using plenty of archery as well. What we've done is we've taken the bows, left the arrows behind, so the less of a health and safety hazard, really. We're experimenting with other effects. Again, that German Robin Hood musical that's come up recently, they have this very, very cool effect where we think it's a string that they pull. And then as they loose the string, it kind of disappears within the bow itself. So it gives the illusion of an arrow being fired, but there's not actually anything there. So we're taking some inspiration from that and seeing if that's something we can use at certain key moments. But yes, in the interest of health and safety, but also in the interest of letting the audience use some of their own imagination, we are just using the bow, but without the arrow. So yeah, plenty of archery, But in order to make that believable, you have to have people reacting to it as if they've just been hit by an arrow, as if the target has just moved. So it comes as much from the acting as it does from the actual action on stage. So yeah, plenty of that, but the key is making it believable from truly every angle when you're doing it around. It's tricky.
Yeah, no, those are the sorts of shows I used to do, and I understand those challenges well, and as well as the importance of selling those blows and strikes.
Yeah, it's truly comes down to the actors in terms of selling that moment, from their physical reactions to their facial expressions, the way they're handling their weapons. That's what it comes down to. But yeah, we have a very good team, and I can't speak highly enough of our fight director. She really knows what she's doing.
Superb. So just to get back to the ballads, and you've teased out a few of the elements that you've been pulling from. Were there any kind of moments or characters or just themes from any of the ballads that you felt super excited, this is what I need to use, and also any that you wanted to use but you couldn't quite fit in?
Yeah, many of those moments. Again, really just the core themes of fellowship and the idea of creating your own law and living by your own rules in a world that doesn't necessarily allow you to do that, in a world that you don't agree with. And that is, of course, a very recurring theme throughout the ballads. So that is the core one that I'm really getting at from start to finish. But in terms of the ballads themselves, there are so many moments. There was one particular that I was and still am very excited about, from, I believe it's the Jest of Robin Hood, where you have Robin and the sheriff coming together in Sherwood Forest, and they're just kind of sitting beneath the trees, and they're not fighting, they're not arguing, they're actually just sitting there and talking. And just this famous rivalry, who I think of kind of two sides of the same coin, that moments of them coming together towards the end of the show, in this case, towards the end of the story and the end of the ballad, and actually just talking. There's something so magical about that moment. And so I have brought that into the ballads. We do see that moment between Robin and the sheriff. And in this case, I treat the sheriff as an older figure. He's really almost as old as the ballads themselves. For almost as long as we've had Robin Hood, we've also had the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Yep.
And the fact that he is only referred to as a sheriff so that he is timeless, he is relatable no matter what era you're reading these stories in.
Yep. So appears in many of the ballads and never given a name.
Yeah, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I did some research when I was starting to do the show. I did some research to see if he had a name, and of course there have been many names attributed to him before.
Yep.
But I assume that's part of the reason that he often doesn't, is that he continues to be relatable and timeless regardless of what era you're watching from.
Right. My take has always been that it is that role. It is that governmental function of the sheriff that matters, not the individual person, and how he represents the way that laws can be abused, the way that power corrupts individuals, and in that function, being the sheriff matters more than it being a particular individual.
Yeah, it's symbolic. So I've definitely kept that for this one, but I've also kind of tried to make him symbolic of the ancient role of the ballads themselves, because he has been a part of this for as long as they've been going. So in this version, he's kind of like this tired old figure. We've been beating this horse over and over again, and he's kind of ready to retire. So I view him as almost an older, darker version of Robin. As Robin kind of went down this corrupt path and was drawn into that, this is who he would have become. So that moments with Robin and the sheriff sitting in the woods, it's kind of two versions of the same character sitting together. And I felt that just reading The Jest of Robin Hood, and I thought that was such a magical moment that I wanted to have in ours. So yeah, little moments like that. And again, the tale of Robin Hood and the monk, it just makes sense that Robin would be recognized by someone that he's robbed before. Yeah, taking little moments like that.
Nice.
But yeah, Robin and the sheriff is probably my favorite dynamic.
Are there any moments that come to mind that you had really been wanting to try to fit in somehow, but just couldn't quite work it out?
Yeah, there were a few that I think of, some of which have been lost from my memory now. But again, Much the Miller's Son was a character that I wanted to include. And I think the fact that it is a miller's son specifically living in a time period where so many people are hungry, and that's kind of part of the story, is, combating poverty and hunger. So having the miller's son, there was a lot to play with there in terms of actual symbolism. But it just wasn't, working within the story. You kind of had to start cutting the cast down. And at a certain point, the plot just becomes too messy if you try and add too much into it. So that's the other reason that you had to start cutting back on certain characters. But so yeah, bits like that I would have loved to keep. But in terms of making a show this big, because it is a full-length 2.5-hour musical, in order to kind of streamline that and make the plot cohesive, you have to start cutting back some of those moments. So keeping it to the core themes of, the fellowship and the injustice, the core dynamics of Robin and the sheriff and those recognizable figures that you have to have is kind of what's made the story what it is. But yeah, many, many characters. My go-to is the Leopold's Classic Library, Joseph Ritson. I don't know if this is something you've encountered before. It's kind of my Bible. It's literally just photocopies of all the original ballads. And it's just, a fantastic resource for looking through those. So yeah, pretty much every moment, there's always one from every story that you want to include. But at a certain point, you just have to start cutting back and making sacrifices. Kill your darlings, as they say.
Yes, Joseph Ritson, for listeners, was a writer and philosopher and revolutionary in the late 1700s, early 1800s, who kind of collated and collected Robin Hood ballads and is sort of responsible or given a lot of credit for helping to preserve them. Stephen Basato wrote a great book about him a few years ago, and you can find easily collections of Ritson's work, which includes collecting the medieval ballads, but also like the Garland ballads from the 1600s and 1700s as well.
Yeah, he's a really fantastic resource. And of course, it's the language is preserved as well. So you're reading that older version of English and seeing what it actually would have looked like. But yeah, it certainly does make you wonder, because these are the earliest recorded versions we have. But how old is Robin Hood really? It's going to go so much further back.
Yep.
We'll just never know.
Yeah, those. It's been touched on a few times in the podcast, but the earliest recorded ballads we have are coming from the mid to late 1400s, and we know for certain that 100 years before that, people were telling stories and singing songs of Robin Hood. So how they might have changed between when people were first singing them and telling them and when they were written down, we don't know. And when they started singing them and telling them, we don't know. So you've got your Will Scathlock, but you had to cut Much the Miller's Son. So just speaking of things going back that far, Much the Miller's Son, Will Scathlock, and Little John are all characters associated with Robin Hood, going back to those earliest written stories that we have. So they all have that like cred, and Little John's the one that is the most well known. So it's kind of like Maid Marian. It's like, how could you do Robin Hood and not have Little John present in some sort of way? How did you work in your Will Scathlock, and what's kind of key to his character, and why did he make the cut when Much the Miller's Son didn't?
Yeah, I think Will Scathlock kind of, at least when I started approaching it, it just kind of happened to fit into the plot a bit better. And when I cut Much the Miller's Son out of the story, what happened was Will Scathlock kind of took some of those elements in and just absorbed the character that I just killed off. So a lot of the scenes, a lot of the lines ended up going to Will instead of Much the Miller's Son, and the character kind of grew from there. But yeah, Will Scathlock is, again, more of an ambiguous figure and kind of difficult to write in some ways, because he's not a super concrete figure. We don't have like as many distinct features that you say, yes, that's definitely Will Scathlock. So he's a bit harder to pinpoint.
In some ways, even more of a blank template than the Sheriff's Wife.
Yeah, and kind of similar to Marian in that sense too. It's a bit of a dark horse to work with. So you can kind of make that character your own. And I've used Will Scathlock as a tool to lean into the social justice side of things, where Robin, I've kind of tried to keep very authentic to those early ballads, where he's stealing the rich to give to himself and to his friends, and, occasionally to the poor citizen that comes passing by. But he's not a social justice warrior in the way that a lot of modern audiences perceive him to be. So in the interest of keeping that Robin from that same origin story, I've used Will to kind of lean into the social justice side of things as we'd recognize it nowadays. So creating that plot of him being connected to Nottingham, connected to the people of Nottingham and wanting to serve them, whereas Robin is a little less altruistic, I suppose, because he was ultimately stealing to give to himself and to the merry men, and that was how they made their livelihood. But Will in this version is a bit more selfless, I suppose. and very similar to Robin in certain ways, but with slightly different goals. So as with Marion, it's a case of trying to keep them authentic to the ballads and keeping those lines. And in some cases, I've pulled lines straight from the ballad, particularly for Will Scathog, where I've been like, this is an amazing line, and I'd like to quote this and keep this within the script. So I've done that for Will in a couple of cases. But yeah, as with Marion, it's a case where you can make this character yourself and serve the story that you're trying to tell. Because he's a bit mysterious. We don't really know as much about him, but that's partly what makes him interesting.
Mm-hmm. So how about your Robin? So you mentioned trying to keep him very close to what is present there in the ballads. Modern adaptations most frequently portray him as this disenfranchised noble, going back to the Tudor plays. That's been a common thing, but in the ballad tradition, he's clearly a yeoman. What sort of class of society do you have him coming from in your version? Do you have, whether it's in the play on the page or not, do you have a reason for his outlawry, his particular origin story?
Yeah, I've hinted to that, the fact that he comes from, in some cases comes from the nobility line. But I did deliberately want to keep that open because there have been so many origin stories in the past, and there isn't necessarily one right answer. And I didn't want to force it into being one right answer. I wanted to let the audience kind of build some of that themselves and their own perceptions. So I have hinted to that. We know that Robin's in the woods. We know that he's chosen to be in the woods, and he's taken his friends out there with him. But there's some lines, particularly towards the end, when King Richard makes his famous appearance. Spoilers if for no one if you haven't encountered that before. King Richard. Yeah, precisely. King Richard makes his appearance, and he mentions like, "Oh, you've had money before, you've had power before, you've had wealth before," and he kind of offers that back to him. And again, this is a point where I've deviated slightly for specific reasons. But the idea is that I wanted to hint towards Robin coming from that line of nobility, but I'm not making it a huge part of the plot. I'm not making it a huge part of his character. I just wanted to nod to the fact that this is, where he's from. But because there are multiple origin stories, I want to keep it feeling authentic and not shoehorning ourselves into, one little box, and wanted to keep that particularly open.
Yeah. You mentioned this core theme around community and a little bit of sort of resisting the worst aspects of society, being in a society that's not the one that you built and wanting to rebel against it. What elements do you include in your play to help reinforce the themes that you wanted to bring out?
It does come from the community that forms on stage. The merry men are very much their fellowship. And part of the way that I've wanted to push that is the difference between the merry men and the villains, where the merry men, they have some of their disputes, they can have some of their disagreements, but ultimately they are working together as a team and they're working towards the same goal. Whereas the villains, when you have the villain scenes, they're almost always arguing, they're bickering, they're at each other's throats. And that's part of the contrast that I've been trying to build to emphasize that theme of fellowship and community. So we see that working with the merry men, and you don't see it working with the villains because they are just constantly falling apart and constantly at odds with one another. But it also comes from the people of Nottingham because it is a large cast show, and there's a reason we call it Nottingham the Musical rather than Robin Hood the Musical. Because while he is, the leader of the merry men, and he is this very central figure, it is ultimately about the people that build around him. Because that is the central theme of the ballads, is a sense of fellowship and community. And that's partly what I wanted to emphasize by calling it Nottingham rather than Robin Hood. It's about the merry men, it's about the people. So you see that on stage, certainly, in terms of, because there's, again, a large cast show, so it's a lot of people on stage. But partly within the music, too, the way that those parts come together. It's a lot of ensemble singing moments. There's a song towards the end called The Ballad that's all about that. It's about bringing people together. It's about singing together. That's a number where you get the audience involved as well, because we want the audience to feel included in that. And that's how we're creating that sense of community and fellowship, is by including truly everyone, including the audience into those moments.
Wonderful. Yeah, that sounds great. So if anybody is interested in seeing the show or finding out more about the Edinbards, what's the best way for people to do that?
We do have our Instagram. It's just at the Edinbards. So Eden as in Edinburgh, and then Bards because we're a Robin Hood musical. So yeah, at the Edinbards on Instagram. And if you click, there's a link in the bio that you can get to tickets running from the 25th to the 28th of May at the Pianodrome here in Edinburgh.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll make sure to include a link to your Instagram in the episode description. What might be next for you now that you've got this, show that you've been working on for a decade?
Yeah.
About to come out into the world?
What a great question. Yeah, so the priority at the moment is the kind of May run that's coming up. My particular dream, and people ask me all the time, like, what's the road to Broadway or the West End? But obviously, I'm trying to keep my goals a bit more realistic. Those are obviously very ambitious goals. But for me, the big dream that's always been the case for me is taking it to Sherwood Forest specifically. I would love to see the show happen in Sherwood Forest. And it turns out that's a fairly realistic dream. We've been in talks for Sherwood Forest for a little while now. We're looking to take it down there next summer. There's lots of logistics that need sorted out and questions that need answering. But ultimately, I think that is the big dream for me. So that's what I'm hoping for. Not for this year, but for next year. It would be amazing.
Yeah. Have you been to the Sherwood Forest Visitor Center area?
Yeah, I did a wee writer's retreat there a couple of years ago as I was working
lovely.
on the show. And it was magical. It's a really gorgeous forest.
Yeah, and there are a few places that are set up where one could do a show. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go down this summer see what their space looks like. So you have festivals and performances there all the time. So
yes,
that's the dream.
The 40th anniversary of the Robin Hood Festival is this August.
Wow, it's 40 years.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yes, I've multiple times had people asking me, like, so I think in August I might be around the Sherwood Forest area. Is there anything you'd recommend doing? Like, well, so it happens.
You should ask.
Good timing.
Yeah, brilliant timing. Yeah, that's the same timing as the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, festival that we get up here every year. So lots of potential there.
Yeah, so if somebody is not able to make it to Edinburgh next month or to Sherwood Forest next summer, will there be any aspects of the play that might be filmed, might go online somewhere, whether it's the whole show or sections of it?
I hope so, yeah. I'd like to see more sections of the show on our Instagram too. I'd love to have it recorded, even for our own purposes, if not for, the wider audience. But yeah, I am hoping to have that filmed, and hopefully we will see many more performances of it in future. Hopefully this is just the beginning, and then it will run for years to come. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amber, and I hope that you and the whole cast and crew have a fantastic run of the show, and I wish you just all of the success with it. Is there anything else you would like people to kind of know about the show or the Edinbards?
Yeah, we are quite a new company, and we are really dedicated to the show. This is where it began. So yeah, my advice would be keep reading your Robin Hood, get as close to to the original stories as you can, because I think a lot of people haven't read them, don't realize how funny they are, how fun they can be. So that's what I like to encourage, is go back and actually read the original Robin Hood tales. But yes, if you are looking for a live kind of immersive production, folk medieval sounds, again, I like to think this is quite a unique thing that we have an action adventure musical with a folk medieval sound behind it. It's not something you see a lot in musical theatre. So if that's your vibe, here we are.
Yeah. Authentic sounds, action, some comedy, and a message, and that incorporation of authentic elements and action and music. Like, you're right, that's not a thing one comes across often. They might find one of those here or there. I've seen several Robin Hood productions that include some sword and quarterstaff fights and things, and like I said, the pantomimes and other plays that will use modern music and the old operas, but this is something a little bit different from all of those.
Yeah, that's my hope. That's my goal anyway, is to help fill that niche.
Mm-hmm. And I really like how you've mentioned elements from Robin Hood and the Monk and Robin Hood and the Potter, since those are two of the medieval poems that I almost think of as in like opposition to one another. They're like the Robin Hood that you meet in both of those are very different characters, and that you were finding, ways to pull elements from both of those, I think is fun, rather than just saying, well, I don't like this one and I'll just ignore it. But finding what still works to make, a cohesive story for you.
Yeah, and that's the joy of having so many centuries of material to work with, is that you can pull bits and pieces and pull it all together. And it won't always kind of add up to each other, but in making a show like this, you can pull the elements that you need to, and you can make them work with each other. And most of them do work with each other. But yeah, they're gorgeous stories. So very fun, so very silly.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time today, and best of luck with the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me.
My thanks again to Amber for joining me in the Greenwood. I wish her and the rest of the Edinbards the best of luck with their production of Nottingham the Musical. If you want to hear more on the unique and varied takes other playwrights have used when bringing Robin Hood to the stage, you could listen to episode 17, where friend of the show and frequent contributor Mike Nichols discussed his play, The Gospel of Friar Tuck, which was adapted for presentation over YouTube during the COVID-19 pandemic. Or episode 20, where I discussed Robin Hood, Legend of Sherwood with Jeff Messer and his work adapting that play into comic book form. And of course, there is episode 26, where playwright Adam Simkowitz joined me in the wake of his play, Maid Marian or The True Tale of Robin Hood, getting banned at an Indiana high school. There's also episode 37, where Philip Hickman tells me about how his Robin Hood play was inspired by a book about the history of debt and its impact. And you also get to hear my family and I review that particular production. If you get a chance to see Nottingham the Musical, or have a different stage version of Robin Hood you'd like to tell us about, then please reach out over social media or email. You can find us on Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, and Instagram, all with the handle Into Greenwood. There's also a Robin Hood-centric Discord server where we play games, share photos, organize watch parties, and run a book club. Our current selection is a pair of young adult novellas about the children of Robin and Marian, written by Carrie Vaughan. If you are willing and able to help us keep this podcast going, then please consider going to patreon.com/intogreenwood, where you can contribute as little as $1 per month to help keep this podcast on the air. This month, we'd like to give an extra thank you to Kyle Rovagig for being our newest supporter at the Stout Yeoman tier, and to Alan W. Wright for upgrading their pledge to the Notorious Outlaw level. Alan Wright is the webmaster for boldoutlaw.com, a website that you will absolutely fall in love with if you've ever enjoyed even a single episode of this podcast. Thank you, Kyle, Alan, and all of you other yeomen, bandits, and outlaws that help keep the lights on here in the Greenwood. If you'd like to show a little appreciation for all the work that goes into putting these episodes together, but aren't sure about a recurring donation, then you can help keep us well caffeinated for these late night editing sessions by going to buymeacoffee.com/intogreenwood. You can also peruse our fine Robin Hood themed merch at our Dashery shop, link in the episode description, or by searching for Into the Greenwood on tpublic.com. As an independent podcast that is brought to you absolutely ad-free, every single purchase or small donation makes a huge difference. And since this whole endeavor was inspired by our guy Robin, Into the Greenwood will always donate a minimum of 10% of all proceeds to charity. Our select charity remains Trees, Water, and People, a top-rated organization working to provide sustainable solutions to provide food and clean water to impoverished communities around the world. Also helpful is, of course, any sort of sharing of episodes, rating and reviewing on your favorite podcast app, and all those sorts of wonderful, super useful, and absolutely free methods that help others find the show. The number of ratings and reviews we have is really still quite limited, and it would be nice to get that number up a bit. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. No portion of this podcast has been created with the use of generative AI. The theme music for Into the Greenwood is by Plastic 3. However, instead of our normal outro music, we've been provided with an appropriate bit of music by the Edinbards. This is a section of a song called The Greenwood Tree, sung by Stephen Park, accompanied by Kelly Nichols on mandolin, Damian Smith on the bass, and Amber Lipman on the flute. It was composed by Amber Lipman.
Heed these branches, heed these leaves, from their roots to the canopy. The air is fresher in their eaves, beneath the greenwood tree. I want to live this way forever, done with the ways that we know. The ways of the woods are far more clever, where the oak and holly grow, where the oak and holly grow. So leave the past at the edge, here it's heard by none. The wood honors our pledge to leave behind what's done. A new world waits ahead, and in it we are free. Never mind what is unsaid beneath the greenwood tree.